It's time to look at my Home Assistant integrations and add-ons that I use on a daily basis, 2022 version. So let's get started. Home Assistant has 1,968 integrations, anywhere from alarm panels to cameras to doorbells to calendars, health, image processing, all kinds of stuff. And you can see a little bit of a list here. These are in alphabetical order. And so there's just tons and tons of those. Now, in order to power my Home Assistant instance, I use a number of those. Most of these things that you see on my dashboard are powered through some sort of integration or add-on. And there's a couple different categories. There's the core add-ons that are provided by the Home Assistant or maintained by the Home Assistant core developers. And then there's other add-ons for things that are provided in the HACS, Home Assistant Community Store, and then there's some repositories that are maintained by individuals. But I'm going to go over my top used integrations and add-ons that make everything possible. Without them, I wouldn't have a Home Assistant set up like I do today. So let's just jump right into it. We're going to go over to Configuration and Add-ons. Now, I did a video on this last year. There are a few changes to what I have from last year. So if you watch that video, you'll see some of this as a repeat, but there are some new things that I do as well. So let's just jump right into it. AdGuard Home is my DNS server that I use inside my home network. And this serves all of my DNS requests and also does filtering for malware and other ad-based stuff. Now, I have two instances of AdGuard running in my home network. The first one is on my Odroid, and that's my production one. And my second one is going to be on my Raspberry Pi. And I made a video on how I sync those two together. Basically, the settings are synced across both of them. So if I make a change on the master or the primary AdGuard, which is on my production server, then it will move it over to the secondary or the Pi server or the Raspberry Pi server, and they're always in sync. All right, so let's go back and let's take a look at another one. We have DuckDNS. And DuckDNS is used for dynamic DNS with Let's Encrypt support. So I want to access my Home Assistant instance from outside of my network or inside my network. I use DuckDNS to provision myself a domain, and I apply an SSL certificate to that domain. And then I'm able to connect to Home Assistant via SSL, both internally and externally. And one of the cool things about AdGuard is that I can use the DNS rewrites to use the same domain inside my network as I use outside. So it's seamless to all of my applications and devices. It just gets rewritten if I'm on my local network. And then if I'm outside, public DNS resolves that for me. So that's a cool feature of AdGuard that I use in addition to DuckDNS. Now, there are a number of ways to connect to Home Assistant remotely. And I'm not saying any one of them is better than the other. Each has its own caveats. I do still support Nabu Casa because that is where the core developers work, and that's what the core of Home Assistant is built on. So even though I might be using a different ingress method, I do actually use Nabu Casa, and I still use Nabu Casa for using my smart speakers. So I can control my devices using an integration through Nabu Casa for both the Amazon and the Google smart speakers. So there's a benefit for all of that. All right, so let's go back and look at our next one, and that is going to be ESPHome. Now, ESPHome allows me to easily flash my ESP devices with custom firmware to control what I want to control with it. And if we look at my current setup here, you'll see that I have a number of devices already running in ESPHome. I've got air sensors. I've got an ESP in the attic that monitors my radio equipment and temperatures, fridge temperatures, and then some other temperatures and voltage sensors around the house. So ESPHome is pretty awesome. And if you look at ESPHome.io, you can just look through all the different types of devices that are supported by ESPHome. Now, ESPHome was picked up by Nabu Casa / Home Assistant, and all of the work being done now is being done by the the Home Assistant core developers. So this is pretty awesome. That means it'll continue to support new devices. There's thousands of devices in here that you can add into Home Assistant using ESPHome. All right, so back over to our add-ons now. Let's take a look at the next one, Frigate NVR. Frigate NVR is my probably second most used and most powerful integration / add-on. The Frigate NVR allows me to take all my cameras and put them into Home Assistant through automations, viewing them and everything else. So I can take a look at my Frigate NVR here and take all these cameras, look at events, look at bird's eye views, debugging, and everything else. Now, Frigate doesn't have to be in Home Assistant to work, but it does help. It makes things easier because I can also set up automations to do specific things on the cameras. I really enjoy it. What I like about all these integrations is that they're basically in a one-stop shop, and I have one device here that I can maintain with all the stuff that I use on a daily basis. So that's a pretty awesome add-on, and I've got a lot of videos on Frigate. Frigate's a whole world by itself, so go ahead and check those out. Now, the next two integrations kind of go hand in hand, both InfluxDB and Grafana. Influx is a scalable data store for metrics, events, and real-time analytics. It's basically a time-based database. It stores all the stuff I want in Home Assistant to be put into Grafana or to be stored on a long-term basis. And you can go through and you can do some explorations and look at various things within Home Assistant. So this one is Influx, and it has its own Explorer, which I'm showing you here. It shows you just specific things that go on. So look at temperature here, for example. It makes a nice graph of whatever's in here, but I don't use the graph part of this, and I don't explore much unless I'm doing some troubleshooting. The next integration I want to talk about is Grafana, and that's the one that I take all that Influx data and put it into. So if we open up Grafana and take a look at some of the things we can do with that, we can see that I have a whole bunch of dashboards that I've created here. And one of them here is our power dashboard. And all of the data going into Influx is then pulled into Grafana using queries in Grafana. And here's another example of a dashboard that I use, my weather dashboard. All of my weather values are stored in InfluxDB, and then they're pulled into Grafana this way. So you can just take a look at some of the stuff you can do with that. All right, so let's go back to our next add-on that I want to talk about, and that is going to be the Mosquito Broker. And this is a very important broker for me. All my Tasmota devices and some of my other devices talk to Home Assistant via MQTT, so it's important to have the MQTT broker running. But one of the things I want to show you too is MQTT Explorer, just to show you the amount of traffic that's coming in from my Home Assistant devices, or my devices in the Home Assistant via the MQTT bus. And you can see all of this stuff here at one point or another has sent information to Home Assistant via MQTT, and I use that to act on it. So MQTT is a very important tool for me to use within my environment. All right, next up is going to be the Nginx Proxy Manager. The Nginx Proxy Manager allows me to set up proxying for domains that might be inside my local network and be able to reach them from outside with an SSL certificate, because Nginx Proxy Manager will also manage your SSL certificates. So if you look at the web UI here, you'll see that I have 3 proxy hosts, and I also have 3 certificates managed by this Nginx Proxy Manager. So I'm actually able to control the SSL certificates, and I'm also able to access domains inside my network using Nginx Proxy Manager. All right, so let's go back over to the next integration, and that is Node-RED. Node-RED is where I do a lot of my automations, and I'm a very visual person, so it allows me to do these automations visually and lets me see how everything flows, and also I can do troubleshooting this way. I can, when the door's unlocked, I can provide some outputs into Home Assistant to alert me to something or to turn on lights or something else. So for example, if you open the garage door between sunset and 11 p.m., all the lights come on so that it's not dark in the house when you get in the house. So I have a lot of things I do with Node-RED. I alert on fridge door left open, or doors left open. I do things when there's motion. I monitor certain devices around my house so that I know if something goes offline. Flood monitoring, all kinds of stuff goes on in Node-RED. So it's a very, very powerful add-on, and I've been using it almost since the beginning, because before Home Assistant got really good with the UI on their automations, I had to do a lot of this stuff within Node-RED because it just was easier to do. But I've come to love it and enjoy it, and so I keep using it. All right, so let's go back to our next automation, which is going to be Samba Backup. I can't stress enough how important it is to back up your Home Assistant instance. I set it up to back up daily. I keep 5 snapshots remotely on my NAS device, and I keep 3 snapshots or backups on my Home Assistant device, so I can just restore directly from one of those if something doesn't go right on an upgrade or if I break something messing around. So it's super important to do this, to do backups. And you can see that you're going to just install the Samba Backup from your add-on store, and then you can use it to back up to offsite or NASs or something else like that. Does it strictly over Samba, so I could send it anywhere I have a Samba share. All right, so the next one is Tailscale. Tailscale is a zero config VPN, and I've talked about that in some of my videos. It allows me to connect internally to my network or this device. I could connect directly to this Home Assistant device through using Tailscale. If I brought up my phone and decided I wanted to talk to Home Assistant directly without going through anything else, I could do that with that. Tailscale also gives you the ability to route your local IP range to your device you're connecting from. So I can access everything on my local network using Tailscale as well. I think it's a really good and interesting add-on that I use because it gives me access to my local network without having to open router ports or anything like that. One of the other big ones is Vaultwarden, which used to be Bitwarden. This is my password vault. This is where I store all my passwords for all my sites, and I store that, or I'm able to access it via browsers. I'm able to access it via my phone. So I have a central repository that manages my passwords. I think that's highly recommended too. If you think about password security these days, you don't want to ever use the same password on the same site ever. There's no reason to do that with the myriad of password managers that we have out today. So make sure that you're using a password manager of some sort. It doesn't have to be Vaultwarden, but you can. There's LastPass, 1Pass, I think. There's a few others out there. I use Vaultwarden because it's open source and it's fully controlled by me. It's not sitting out on somebody's server anywhere. So just keep that in mind as well. Use some sort of security to manage your passwords, especially in today's day and age where things are just hacked and people are compromised and one site gets hacked, which then gives you access to everything else that you own. So make sure you're doing good security practices there. All right, no more soapbox on that. Finally, we have WireGuard, which is another VPN solution. Tailscale is actually based on WireGuard. This doesn't have to be installed for Tailscale to work, but I also keep WireGuard ready in case I need a backup for Tailscale. It's just duplication, really. And then the most important part of my network is this Z-Wave JS to MQTT add-on. This is how I control my entire Z-Wave network. And if you look at my dashboard, you'll see that I have just tons and tons and tons of devices, and most of those are on Z-Wave. So you can get a good indication of what your network's doing. You can go in here and you can configure things on your network. If I want to go down here, and I made a video on the sync controller. This is how I did it, was through this panel right here. If I go down to my configuration settings and I go in here, I can actually change values on the device itself. People have asked me in the past, why do you use Z-Wave JS to MQTT versus just Z-Wave JS, which is a native add-on for Home Assistant? The JS to MQTT gives me the dashboard, gives me the ability through a UI to configure my devices, and gives me a quick overview of the status of all of my devices on my network, which you can see right here. So that is the reason why I like the UI. I like being able to go in here and see a status, and I like being able to configure it through the UI. You can do the same thing or most of the same things through script calls on Home Assistant itself, but this just makes it easier. And there's no reason to make things harder if they don't have to be harder. All right, so those are my integrations that I'm using in Home Assistant, or my add-ons I'm using from the add-on store. And I never really showed you this, but if you want to add one of these add-ons, if I can get back to the right screen here, you just come down here and you click on this little button down here on the right. It says Add-on Store. And then you can come in here and you can find any of the add-ons that are available by searching for them. So you just start typing, letters in here and whatever you want to search for. but you can also see all of the official add-ons. You can see some of the other repositories I've added. If you need to add a custom repository, you just come to this line right here and you add it in, and then it becomes part of your Home Assistant store where you can add things from it. And again, these are official because they're maintained by the core developers. The rest of these are add-ons that have been added by community members and have been pulled into Home Assistant directly. So you can see here there's quite a few different community add-ons that are running on my system from different repositories. So that's how you add those. Now, one more thing to note about these add-ons here. A lot of these add-ons require you to install an integration. So if you come over to this part where you go into integrations, a lot of them will now be auto-discovered in here. And if they're not auto-discovered, you can add an integration down here by clicking the blue button, which I think is hidden. Yep, you come down here and click on the blue button, and it will add, you can then add an integration from this list right here if it's not auto-discovered. And that list of integrations I showed here, these are all the integrations that are available to Home Assistant. These are all of them in this list right here. Integrations and add-ons are not mutually exclusive every time, but in a lot of cases, you'll install an add-on, and the add-on then gets integrated into the Home Assistant system via this integration panel here. And a lot of these here are integrations from add-ons that I've already talked about. There's a couple of notes here. Keymaster is one I use to control my door locks, and it's not an official add-on, so I didn't have it in there. We talked about Emporia View. It doesn't have an official add-on, but it is available as an integration. And as you go through here, you can see some of the other ones that are not necessarily part of the add-on store, but they are integrations that we use that I use in Home Assistant. And then finally, one of the other ways to get these is to go into Home Assistant Community Store, which, by the way, itself is its own integration. Home Assistant Community Store has both integrations and front-end device add-ons, and the integrations are things that integrate with Home Assistant. Front-end is typically UI or things that you use to interact with Home Assistant. So if we look at integrations down here, you can see again, there's just hundreds or thousands of integrations that you can install in Home Assistant for whatever you want to do with it. HACS in my case is required to use HACS, but I have these other ones in here. EcoWit Weather Station is how I pull in my EcoWit information from my EcoWit sensor. So I get all my weather data that way. The WebRTC camera is how I display WebRTC streams within Home Assistant. And you can see there's a few others here. Here's my Emporia View and my Frigate. These two are HACS integrations that then get integrated into Home Assistant via the integration panel. So again, go through here and you can see hundreds of different types of integrations you can add. Then there's a whole bunch of front-end items you can add here, and I'll just talk about a couple of these quickly. The Frigate card is one that I use on a regular basis. It is an HACS front-end edition. And then the Roku card I also use, the button card. This one powers a lot of what you see on my dashboard. You'll see a lot of these cards here have different colorings and different sizes, and those are all based on the button card. It's the custom button card. So anyway, that is a listing of things that I use in Home Assistant that power my Home Assistant on the daily basis. Without those integrations, without the work done by the community, without the work done by the core developers, I would have a box that would sit here and have a nice, pretty interface, but nothing to talk to it. Integrations are key to how Home Assistant works. They're also key to how we're able to do a lot of the things we do today in Home Assistant that wouldn't be otherwise possible. And they make Home Assistant a useful tool to manage your smart home, gain insights, become aware of things through alerts or other types of notifications. And it just makes it a really awesome ecosystem to use. So if you have any questions about any of these things, let me know in the comments down below. You can talk to me on Discord. If you're not a subscriber, I really would appreciate you hitting that subscribe button. It does really help the channel grow. and it helps the algorithm think that you like the content, which then makes it show it to other people, which maybe haven't seen it, who might like it, etc., etc., etc. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was a quick, just little rundown for your entertainment purposes and not a how-to this time. And I think I'll quit talking now. See you on the next one.